As frequently will happen when I'm preparing a homily, I turn to my American Collegiate Dictionary, which I bought in 9th grade. It's that thick, and it has almost all the answers I need. And so I opened it, and I looked up the word crisis. And my American Collegiate Dictionary defined crisis as that moment of decision, that turning point. And that certainly fits the gospel that we just heard. For both Martha and Mary, for the disciples, and for the crowd, that moment in Bethany was a turning point. It's an important thing. We hear how Martha meets Jesus on the road, not when he gets there, but she goes out to meet him already on the road. And she asks, Lord, where were you? Why didn't you come when we asked you? It is part question, it's part plea, and it's part accusation. Why weren't you here when we needed you? Why did you let us down? And Jesus looks at her and he says that he is the resurrection and the life. And then he asks her, do you believe this? And you read it perfectly. However, in my own imagination, Martha didn't answer that quickly. I think she just stood there and looked at him. And when he asked, do you believe this? She just looked at him and pondered, what do I believe? What do I really think about him? And she finally says, you're the one. You are the one. Yes, I do believe you're the one. It was a turning point for Martha. Mary would come out and meet Jesus in the same place and ask the very same question as Martha, which was part question, part plea, and part accusation. And it's a turning point for her as well. What does she believe about Jesus? It is, I think, one of the most poignant moments in all the gospel. And I think about that because you and I have all had those experiences. There's been someone that we loved who was sick, someone who was ill that we truly cared for. And we prayed. We prayed that they would get well. We prayed as hard as we could that somehow we could have one more day, one more month, one more year with this one that we loved. And it didn't happen. And it is that moment where we ask ourselves, do we believe? What do we believe? I know that was true for me. This gospel was the same one that was chosen for my grandma's funeral, that I chose for it. I had been to lots of funerals growing up. We had a lot of great aunts and uncles, and the custom in my family was the whole kit and caboodle of us always went to the funeral home and to the funeral. That was just the way of life for us. And, the passing of these elders just seemed like the normal thing. Even with my two grandpas, that was normal. But my grandma was different. It was different for a lot of reasons. Number one, I was the designated grandson after Grandpa died. Not only was I named after him, but I had to take on some of the jobs that he would normally do. And so I was the one that put up the screens or put up the storm windows. I did those things for her. And after I got a car when I was in college and in graduate school, I would go many, many weeks, most weekends, Sundays, to go pick up Grandma. We'd go to the cemetery and visit Grandpa's grave, and then go on to some relative, either one of her siblings or my grandpa's siblings. It was big families. And so there were always lots of great aunts and uncles for me to visit, and I'm probably the only one of my generation that actually knew everybody, just because I went with Grandma. We'd walk in, hugs and kisses. We'd go play cards. We'd have dinner, hugs and kisses, and we would leave. It was the same routine, Sunday after Sunday. Grandma wasn't just my grandma, but she was my traveling buddy. I spent a lot of time with her. The last couple of years of her life were very difficult, and when I was ordained, she was so sick that there wasn't even the thought of her being able to come to my ordination. But I'm sure she waited to die after I was ordained. And so hers was the very first funeral that I had anything to do with. I planned the whole thing from beginning to end, the wake service and the funeral itself. And I chose this gospel. And I had no clue how I would be. This was Grandma. And so I decided to write out the homily and then have my parish secretary type it up so that at the funeral, if I didn't think I could do it, I could just hand it to my classmate who I knew would be there, and he could do it for me. But when it came time, after he had read the gospel, I walked over to the ambo, and I pulled out the papers, and I don't think I looked down more than 4 times. What I said that day came not from my head, but from my heart. And I always look at that as being the last gift Grandma gave me. That at that moment, that crisis moment in my life, the question is, do you believe? And I realized that I did. That was her gift to me. And over the years, I've celebrated over 1,000 funerals, and I've had friends and people who've gotten to know me ask, how can you keep doing that? You know, some days, some weeks, there were funerals almost every day. They always come in bunches, and I can remember one day having as many as 3 funerals. And the question is, how can you do that? And I go, it's hard. It really is. Because there are people grieving here. And I meet them in their grief, and I understand that. I've been there too. And sometimes I even cry with them. But in the end, every time I celebrate a funeral, the question is asked, do you believe? And I do. I've come to believe that He is the hope, that He is the resurrection and the life, and that the promise of Jesus is true. Like Martha, like Mary, like the disciples, like the crowd, yes, Lord, I do believe. And that's what we gather here to celebrate again on this 5th Sunday of Lent, on this 3rd Scrutiny Sunday, when normally we would have the catechumens here, the elect who were chosen for baptism at the Easter Vigil, and we would ask them some questions as a part of their baptismal preparation. But as you can see, we have no catechumens this year. We don't have anyone in the pipeline. But the question is not just for them, it's always for us as well. We gather here, and the question is, do we believe? What do we believe? What do we believe about Jesus, the one we've gathered to celebrate? We gather to celebrate His suffering, His death, and His resurrection. And the question is, do we believe? We're about to enter into Holy Week, when through the wonderful power of liturgy, you and I walk through those last hours of the Lord Jesus' life. We walk with Him from His table at the Last Supper to the foot of the cross to the tomb. We celebrate all of that. And by the power of liturgy, we experience that once more. It is that wonderful gift that we are about to receive. The question is always asked, do we believe? Do we believe as we walk with the Lord Jesus, who is led by the Father through His suffering and death to the glory of the resurrection? Do we believe? What do we believe? That's an important thing. For those who believe, death becomes just a horizon. And horizons are nothing but the limit of our sight. And so we gather here again and ask the Lord Jesus to raise us up beyond the limits of this world, so we can see beyond the horizon, so that you and I can see the promise of the life that is yet to come, so that that light, the light of the risen Lord, can guide us in our journey through this world, to help us to live as people who are destined for something more. And it changes the way we live. We ask Him to raise us up beyond the limits of this world so that we can see a little bit more beyond the horizon, to see the sun rising, the Son of God who shines his light on us all. Today, on this fifth Sunday of Lent, on this third Scrutiny Sunday, we gather to celebrate once more the one who is resurrection and life. And we ask the Lord to lift us up just a little so that today we can see beyond the horizon and watch the sun